Hello, my name is Tony. Producer-director Frank Perry, uncle of Katie, and his screenwriter-wife Eleanor made several films together in the 60s, the best of which, I believe, was the seminal Burt Lancaster surrealist psychological drama The Swimmer in 1968. The Swimmer is one of the best American motion pictures ever made, and one day when I grow up, I'll review it. If I grow up, that is, and find myself transformed from a lifelong mediocre hack into a brave and insightful, intellectually supercharged media analyst. Chances of which, I gotta tell you, are slimmer than an anorexic teenager with the Ebola virus on an intravenous diet of prune juice and senna. Not much chance then. The Swimmer is a bit much for the likes of me, sorry to say. Perry went on to direct the infamous and luridly trashy Joan Crawford biopic come hatchet job Mommy Dearest with Faye Dunaway. But previously he'd been capable of some fine innovative shit, stuff that was daringly challenging and artistically courageous. Now I'd never seen or heard of this film until mi amigo Streed of Abracious Productions brought it to my attention. He name-checked it a few times until eventually, because I value his judgment up to a point and his enthusiasm always, I sourced a Blu-ray version and gave it a spin. This is what I found. It's a simple setup exploring complex issues, not least of which is the power imbalance in the dynamic between adults and children and how it manifests in breeding psychological trauma that might prove fatal in certain circumstances. Did I just swallow a psychology degree? A lot of deadbeats with no sense of reality do, apparently. It's a blindingly hot summer day in a rural Connecticut backwater in the early 60s. At an elementary school, a buzzing alarm sounds. It's a warning signal that a nuclear attack is imminent. The headmaster, Calkins, William Daniels, pregnant secretary Betty, Catherine Hayes, and staff attempt to contact the authorities to confirm if it's for real or a mistake. Unable to get through to anyone, Calkins follows the protocol of assuming a genuine threat and sending the pupils home. They're split into groups and assigned to a teacher who will chaperone them. The film focuses on one group led by a nerve-wracked Mrs. Andrews, Nancy Marchand, as they walk through the countryside, pupils splitting away from the group as they come into proximity with their residences. Back at the school, Calkins learns that the alarm was the result of a short circuit in the system. So the adults now know that there is no danger. Those kids heading home, however, do not. One child, Joanne Linda Mayer, fails to convince her parents of an impending disaster and winds up cowering in fear under her bed. Another, Luke Allen Howard, persuades his senile grandmother to go to the basement with him to await the arrival of his father. He weeps in fear, she sits there uncomprehending, oblivious. The mother of a brother and sister, a religious woman, is all too readily convinced by her children. She takes them into the basement to pray for salvation. Harriet, Alice Playton, is from a more affluent family. They have a bomb shelter in the garden. Parents must be early preppers or proto-survivalists. She leads a group of the kids there and immediately takes charge and lays down the rules. When Sarah Marilyn Rogers turns up in a panic because her mother wasn't at home, Harriet won't let her in, insisting there's not enough room, which prompts Sarah's friend Steve Christopher Howard to leave the shelter in search of her. Before Steve can find Sarah, we see her climbing into an abandoned refrigerator for protection. The door closes as Steve passes the fridge. What is probably a jet screeches overhead, leaving a vapor trail. Steve interprets it as being a missile and scrabbles in futility to dig a hole in the ground in which to hide. He shouts "stop" over and over. The screen blurs and fades to black. The Cuban Missile Crisis of 1962 is probably the closest the world has yet come to the brink of nuclear war. Depending on how much longer he sucks oxygen, Mad Vlad Putin may top that. Phrases such as mutually assured destruction found their purchase in popular mass vocabulary, and the threat of global annihilation took on a new and frightening realism. Accompanying seeds of fear and paranoia planted themselves in the public consciousness and provided fertile ground for the movie industry to exploit. In the 50s, movie monsters were regularly born of nuclear fallout or radiation, giant ants, spiders, scorpions and the like. But by the early 60s, things took on a new and worryingly apocalyptic geopolitical flavour. Kubrick's Dr. Strangelove, Sidney Lumet's Failsafe, Frankenheimer's political thriller 7 Days in May, Peter Watkins' The War Game. Ladybug predates them, the first to explore from a docu-drama perspective the implications of the Cuban Missile Crisis and the systemic inadequacies of planned responses to a nuclear strike. The missiles are coming, what do we do? Send the kids home from school to be incinerated with their parents, what else? It's all about family, you know. In a very clever and emotionally sensitive way, Frank and Eleanor Perry, on a shoestring budget and with stark black and white cinematography by Leonard Hirschfeld, frame events from the children's perspective. They spend the film believing the war is real and they are all going to die. The adults get to know otherwise halfway through, but the kids are not afforded the luxury of such relief. Their responses range from philosophical to hysterical to denial. Kids being kids, the younger ones resort to playing games, the older ones taking on the roles of surrogate parents to the younger ones. The film invokes incredible sympathy for them, but not in a mawkish or sugary way. It's undeniably poignant nonetheless, without being over-sentimentalized. Throughout, there are nice little touches. On the journey, Sarah gets the children to follow her, singing and dancing as they go. Instantly, I was reminded of the Dance with Death in Bergman's The Seventh Seal, which I suspect was the intention. When Sarah stumbles across the abandoned fridge, it's in surroundings that already resemble a post-apocalyptic wasteland. My knee-jerk reaction was to think back to the public safety ads when I was a kid, which warned of the dangers of playing in fridges. They could only be opened from the outside. Clearly, Sarah is tragically doomed. Fact is, she'd suffocate in about 10 to 15 minutes. I also thought, dear Lord, why? Of Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. Harrison Ford took refuge in a Frigidaire during a nuclear detonation and survived. I further wondered if this film is what inspired Spielberg, who directed the worst Indiana Jones flick in the franchise, until the latest one snatched that rancid crown off its head with effortless ease, like it was no bother at all. As in the adult world, leaders emerge. When they reach the bunker, Harriet imposes her will and becomes an instant dictator, handing out jobs and rationing the food. Factions begin to form, with Steve challenging her decisions at every turn. She likes Steve, but Steve likes Sarah. So when he voices his intention to leave and look for her, Harriet begs him not to go, which is when you realise that limited room and resources wasn't the primary reason for refusing Sarah admission to the bunker. Harriet was just eliminating the competition. A less barbaric but no less emotionally cruel Lord of the Flies vibe resonates herein. Whether they mean to or not, the adults also treat the children with blind cruelty. They don't talk to them or explain things and respond to their questions with platitudes, evasion, or I don't know. There is little attempt at reassurance or empathy, so the kids must fill in the blanks for themselves. All the adults' faith is placed in government and technology. The government wouldn't let this happen. There's nothing on the radio, no public service announcements, just programming as usual. So there can't be a nuclear war. They'd speak to us. They'd tell us what's going on, what to do. Yeah, just like you did with the children. By keeping the kids in the dark, the adults think they're protecting them, but all they're doing is escalating their anxieties and fueling their nightmares. It's estimated that if the power grid is destroyed, it would take about a week for modern civilization to collapse into utter chaos. Sounds a bit optimistic to me, that, when you consider how quickly protests evolve into riots, arson and looting for designer trainers and widescreen TVs. I'd give it a couple of hours before we contemplate wheeling out the barbed wire, taking up arms and eating the postman. Panic and flux kicks in early in Ladybug, and I see that as a realistic depiction of the first stages of a downward spiral. The performances from the adults are a bit stilted and mechanical, and the child actors are not your slick Hollywood professionals. No Mickey Rooneys, Liz Taylors or Brandon D. Wilds here. This adds to the semi-documentary feel of the piece, impressing as both naturalistic and organic, almost improvisational. Ladybug is very much of its time, but that helps it to be historically important viewing. In its way, it's chilling and compelling stuff, and exposes in no uncertain terms how unprepared we were and indeed still are for the event of a nuclear attack or catastrophe. During the pandemic, the call that repeated and echoed incessantly was stay in your homes. Why do I feel that the same chant would largely be the full extent of any advice, guidance or protection from the government if the bombs were to rain down for real? Thank you for your time and attention. Do whatever you want to do. Hit like, don't like, comment, subscribe, be a patron of my Patreon thing, make a financial contribution to keep the wheels turning via the thanks button, or just head into your fallout shelter and wait for it all to end. See you on the scorched earth, pilgrims.